everybody. This is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan.
We are wide open. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Are you wide open? I feel pretty freaking good tonight.
I'm not wide open.
You're not wide open?
No, you know how this time changes, man. They just need to get rid of this. It's just ridiculous. I hate it.
I know.
It's awful.
It's like 8 o'clock, and I'm like, is it time to go to bed yet?
I know, exactly. So you try to watch, and it stinks because I'm a Bengals fan, so of course Bengals play on Sunday night, which is, they play at like 8:20 or something, and really that's 9:20. You get up early, your time's off. You can't watch the whole game. They won, thank goodness, and there we are. So anyway,
it seems like this whole year I hate that when you're wishing your life away, because each day this is the only day we get our whole lifetime, this particular day, and
sure.
Here I am trying to get to December 21st because that's when it starts to get daylight, 1 minute longer each day or whatever it happens to be. But I mean, I'm kind of thankful when we get to the end of deer season here. You get the end of it. Used to be once you got past the 1st of December that, you pretty much had the woods to yourself. But then it seems like a lot of the states like Ohio and West Virginia, they'll add this season or add another deer season here and another deer season there. So it's, they're creeping in there on my time.
Well, there's a lot of deer, so
if they don't get the numbers that they want, then they just keep adding.
It seems like a lot of there's not as many people deer hunting anymore. As the older folks grow up, the kids deer hunt some, and my kids used to deer hunt, but they don't do as much anymore. Maybe a couple days and they'll go deer hunting, but that's it. And it seems like just people aren't doing that much anymore.
Yeah. I was outside today, but I was looking. I have 11 cameras right here now. It's very unusual for me to have so many of my 40-something cameras hit the house. It's
right.
I went through 3 cameras. It's so frustrating. You pull the SD cards, and I had one of them, and it was in a good spot, and it's out over a year. It's a brand new SD card. I've gotten to the point where I'm just pretty much using new ones all the time, even though it's a little expensive to do it. You lose so much data if something just goes wrong. And I had one card that, there's just no pictures on it. So either your camera or your card, and it's just frustrating to lose that time. But I mean, I had a pretty good, I don't think that I should.
So there was nothing on it.
I'll send one when we get into this, you start sending your stories. I had of course, I always see bears on the ones here, but I had a period where I'd seen a bear and then I hadn't seen a bear for a couple of weeks, and I had something pop up, and I shot a video of it just with my phone on my laptop, and I'll send it to you here and you can look at it. But, it looks like a head popping up, and I just can't see it again. The head pops up, and then, you can listen to it and you can hear it rooting around. It's during the daytime, and my camera is moving things around or whatnot. And, I just couldn't tell for sure, exactly what it was. And then in that, I included a bear came by a couple weeks later at night, so that, you could see the difference between the hair that I was looking at versus the bear hair that comes through, which is real sleek and shiny. And, that type of thing, even at night, it looks like that. But
so what do you think it was?
I don't know. I mean, obviously it could have been a bear, but it's just, it wasn't a bobcat, wasn't anything else. It was either a bear or a Bigfoot, but
or a pig. Could have been a pig.
No, we don't really have those, and the camera was too high.
Okay.
And you'll see what I say and what I mean when I send that to you. You're always excited just to get something different on there, and it's interesting how many things are on there. Like I went through once again a period where I had 3 weeks, and I'm telling you, I took Tim, my best friend, down here out there, and he's like, this place, it's an hour uphill, it's 2.5 miles back in this place, and there's this really nice saddle. And I said, well, would you be surprised if I told you that there was 1 3-week period that there was not anything on that game camera? And he's like, there is absolutely no way in the world that's possible.
Right.
And and you wonder what it means. Is there
a predator in the area?
Yeah, exactly. Is it a mountain lion, or is it a Bigfoot that's in there? I mean,
sure.
You're watching these animals come at this hill, look downhill all the time. I'm sending you first just a picture of it so that you can see the head popping up, and then I'm going to send you the actual video second here.
Okay.
Everybody can tell Brad and I are doing this flyby
Right.
line.
Right. We had another guest that we had, and they kind of canceled. So Russ and I had to kind of okay.
I mean, we always have a backup plan, and so tonight is one of our backup plans that we're doing.
All right. So let me see here. So can you email that to me, or
I am emailing you the 2-minute clip because it was too long to text it. I mean, do you see what I mean? Though, like later you can see the hair, and you'll see the hair on a bear, how it looks differently. And it looked to me like it was a head popping up, but it just didn't raise all the way up or something.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. It's and you're right, it's kind of a bushy hair head.
Yeah, not like you would see on bears.
Correct. Let me see here.
All right, so I sent you the thing. So what do you want to get into tonight?
Well, since we had to do a fly by the seat of our pants, and hopefully not everybody gets uninterested and leaves us. I want to talk about Bigfoot stories.
Okay.
And not just stories for me or not stories from you. I'm talking about historical Bigfoot stories, things that have been in the lore of Bigfoot for 100 years or however many years, a long time. And we've kind of referenced them as these tales that exist, and they're these great encounters. Are they true or are they not true? So I've got a couple, and I think you got a couple. So
yeah, let me ask you this. Do you think that, I mean, it seems like these old time witnesses, like when people would swear to, an affidavit or to a law enforcement officer, I mean, people took that stuff really seriously back then. And when you see some of those videos of those witnesses from like the 40s and 50s, I mean, they're so compelling. Nowadays, we tend not to believe that stuff.
Right. And, honestly, I think you're right. Back then was a different time. So your word was your word. I mean, that's it. Your word was your word. If you didn't have your word, you didn't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that these people told these stories. Number one, a lot of them, I don't think they knew money was involved, or, how do they know money was going to be involved? None of them basically got anything from the deal. So I tend to believe them a little bit more, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you remember when we had Dan Perez on, which will be released, I think this Thursday.
Yeah.
He really likes it when people put their name on there, and it's like it gives another layer of honesty. Of course, I don't think Dan's really dealing with witnesses all the time like some of us are, because people just don't want that out there. They got lives and jobs, and some of them very high profile jobs. They don't want to lose their job over a Bigfoot.
Right. Especially, like I said, and it is still, we are still, it's not. Bigfooting still Bigfooting. It's not just like it's mainstream or something. Unlike being anti-Semitic now, which I probably gonna get in trouble for saying that. But what are you laughing at?
Nothing, because it's hard. It's hard for us to get through an episode without us crossing over into something we may or may not get in trouble.
That's just a whole nother. That's a whole nother discussion that is probably not for this, but whatever. I won't get into it. I just won't get into it.
Okay.
So here I'm going to, if you don't care, which that's what you sent me.
Yeah. So what people are looking at is, I pull an SD card out of a game camera, I put it in a computer, a laptop, and then it's a full screen on there, but I'm just sticking my phone up there and taking a picture of what I am looking at. And
Okay.
so it looks, the game camera, because people were asking, it's on a slope. It's about 5 feet high and it's pointing downhill. So, what I mean? Whatever's downhill is a little taller or whatever it happens to be. My impression would be in order for a bear to get up there, and you can see it really doesn't look like bear hair for people
No.
that are around bears or see bears a lot on game cameras.
You know what it looks like kind of hair to me?
What?
Like Harry and the Hendersons, because he had that sagittal crest and he had that funny hair on top.
Mhm.
That's it looks like it's kind of looking towards you, and this is the crest, and it's got some. I think you're right that is a. I don't know. That's not a possum. It's not a raccoon. It's not a dog.
Yeah, it's in the middle of the day.
It's not a pig. How far away was this? Or where was this?
You're driving to a remote location, and then from that remote location, you're going in 2.5 miles, to this place off trail.
Sure.
I mean, it's what I did was in this one particular park, I look at the historical reports and I will choose where I believe that I think that the Bigfoot would stay. And I choose that based on that. I don't think that they want disturbed during the day. I don't think that they want to be bothered. I think that they're going to choose a place where they believe that most people aren't going to come, that they're going to be able to feel secure. There's some water nearby, and it's still close enough that they can go and dumpster dive or raid trash cans or whatever it happens to be. Or a lot of times the deer are staying in closer to the park area. And so, it's easy pickings in there. And so the problem in this one particular place is this valley that I identified as what I believe to be the one that they might be in it's 2.5 miles, no matter which way in the park that I go to get there. It's just that far. So you get into that area, then you've walked in 2.5 miles and it's up a mountain. So what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Because you got to walk another 2.5 miles back out.
Right.
You're carrying your pack and you're carrying all your hydrocal and all.
The point being, it's not at the end of a driveway behind, a 7-Eleven. This is in the middle of nowhere and nobody's going to be back there.
Yeah. This camera was put out in January.
Do you think
there was no people on it?
Do you think it could be the tail of a squirrel? But you said you have video, right?
Yeah. You'll, did you get the email from me?
I don't know. Let me see here.
Yeah, there's a 2-minute long video.
No, probably, who knows? It probably got kicked. It's probably taken forever due to the.
Well, if we don't get it on tonight, we'll put it on another time
week.
So people can see what we're talking about.
Sure.
We're dealing with that. I mean, the frustrating thing is, you're watching this and you can hear it. You saw that bump up. It looked like a head. Mm-hmm. And then you can hear it rooting around with the camera. Of course, the bears are interested in the game cameras because they're a plastic, have formaldehyde in them. It smells like ants to them. And even though it doesn't have human scent on it, it's been there since February or January. You know what I mean? And so here we are in November when I'm pulling the camera. There's no human scent. Scent will last on something like that for maybe a couple weeks or something.
How long ago was that video taken or those pictures?
This year. It was this summer.
Time? Okay. All right. So well after it had been out and the human scent had been gone.
Yeah. And usually, people have asked me, how long are the scent staying on the game cameras? And I think that it's fair to say that, it can gas off for a couple months. So usually when I buy a camera, I just take them out of all the plastic and stuff and I open them up and I just leave them lay in my garage for a couple months to get the smell off them. And then, when I start putting them out there, then I spray them down with scent stuff. And I'm still not sure that, you're getting everything off there, but a lot of the cameras are a couple years old, and there's no smell coming off them.
Sure. Exactly. Okay. So we will, if I get that video, if not, we'll tackle it next week or whatever it is. So, but it is an interesting top of a head. And I'm sure if we put it out to the interweb that they would, they would have some comments and, I can imagine some of the comments they would make.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 4 stories.
Yes.
I picked 2. You picked 2. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I chose as one of mine, I thought about doing, of all the ones I did personally, I thought about doing like my favorite one, but I didn't do that. I just chose a historical one because you wanted to go back farther and get some of those because you're interested in those. So mine is the William Roe, Roe is his last name, account in 1957.
Okay.
And what I have in front of me is a sworn affidavit, which, like I said, in those days, that was a big deal. He went to a judge or a magistrate or whatever it happens to be. And he did it in Alberta, Canada. And so this is the sworn statement. I'll read it to you.
Go ahead.
It says, ever since I was a small boy back in the forest of Michigan, I have studied the lives and habits of wild animals. Later, when I supported my family in northern Alberta by hunting and trapping, I spent many hours just observing the wild things. They fascinated me, but most incredible experience I ever had with a wild creature occurred near a town called Tête Jaune Coche, British Columbia, about 80 miles west of Jasper, Alberta. I had been working on a highway near Tête Jaune Coche for about 2 years. In October of 1955, I decided to climb 5 miles up Mica Mountain to an old deserted mine just for something to do. I came inside of the mine about 3 o'clock in the afternoon after an easy climb. I had just come out of a patch of low brush into a clearing when I saw what I thought was a grizzly bear in the brush on the other side. I had shot a grizzly bear near that spot the year before. This one was only about 75 yards away, but I didn't want to shoot it, for I had no way of getting it out. So I sat down on a small rock and watched, my rifle in my hands. I could see part of the animal's head and top of one shoulder. A moment later, it raised up and stepped out into the opening. Then I saw it was not a bear. This, to the best of my recollection, is what the creature looked like and how it acted as it came across the clearing directly toward me. My first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and probably weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown silver-tipped fur, or hair, but as it came closer, I saw by its breast that it was a female, and yet its torso was not curved like a female's. Its broad frame was straight from shoulder to hip. Its arms were much thicker than a man's arms and longer, reaching almost to its knees. Its feet were broader proportionately than a man's, about 5 inches wide at the front and tapering to much thinner heels. When it walked, it placed its heel of its foot down first, and I could see the gray-brown skin or hide on the soles of the feet. It came to the edge of the bush I was sitting in, within 20 feet of me, and squatted down on its haunches. Reaching out, it pulled the branches of the bushes toward it and stripped the leaves with its teeth. Its lips curled flexibly around the leaves as it ate, and I was close enough to see that its teeth were white and even. The shape of this creature's head somewhat resembled a Negro's. The head was higher at the back than the front. The nose was broad and flat. The lip and chin protruded farther than its nose, but the hair that covered it, leaving bare only parts of its face around the mouth, nose, and ears, made it resemble an animal as much as a human. None of this hair, even on the back of its head, was longer than an inch, and that on its face was much shorter. Its ears were shaped also like a human's, but its eyes were small and black like a bear's, and its neck was also inhuman, thicker and shorter than any man's I had ever seen. And as I watched this creature, I wondered if some movie company was making up a film in this place, and that what I saw was an actor made up to look partly human and partly animal. But as I observed it more, I decided it would be impossible to fake such a specimen. Anyway, I learned later there was no such company near that area, nor did anyone up on Mica Mountain, according to the people who lived in that area. Finally, the wild thing must have got my scent, for it looked directly at me through an opening in the brush. A look of amazement crossed its face. It looked so comical at that moment I had to grin. Still in a crouched position, it backed up 3 or 4 short steps, then straightened up to its full height and started to walk rapidly away the way it had come. For a moment, it watched me over its shoulder as it went, not exactly afraid, but as though it wanted no contact with anything strange. The thought came to me that if I shot it, I would possibly have a specimen of great interest to the scientists the world over. I had heard stories of the Sasquatch, the giant hairy Indians that live in the legends of British Columbia Indians. Also, many claim are still alive today. Maybe this was a Sasquatch, I told myself. I leveled my rifle. The creature was still walking rapidly away, again turning its head to look in my direction. I lowered the rifle. Although I have called the creature it, I now felt that it was a human being, and I knew I would never forgive myself if I killed it. And just as it came to the other patch of brush, it threw its head back and made a peculiar noise that seemed to be a half laugh and half language, in which I can only describe as a kind of a whinny. Then it walked from the small brush into a stand of lodgepole pine. I stepped out into the opening and looked across a small ridge just beyond the pine to see if I could see it again. It came out on a ridge a couple hundred yards away from me, tipped its head back, and again emitted the only sound I had heard it make. But what for this half laugh, half language was meant to convey, I do not know. It disappeared then, and I never saw it again. I wanted to find out if it lived on vegetation entirely and ate meat as well, so I went down and looked for sign. I found it in 4 or 5 different places, and although I examined it thoroughly, could find no hair or shells or bugs or insects, so I believed it to be a strict vegetarian. I found one place where it had slept for a couple nights under a tree. Now the nights were cool up on that mountain at this time of year especially, and yet it had not used a fire. I found no sign that it possessed even the simplest of tools, nor a single companion while in this place. Whether this was a Sasquatch, I do not know. It will always remain a mystery to me unless another one is found. I hereby declare this statement is true in every part.
All right.
Had you heard that before?
I've never heard that one before.
Really?
No.
What was your impressions? What do you think about that?
Okay. Number one, what made him do this? You know, why now? All of a sudden, you know what I mean? Number two, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. What year was this? 1957.
Yeah.
So 1957.
It's before the Patterson Gimlin film.
Right. And
so
it's got a lot of ape like stuff going on. You know what I mean? A lot of ape like behavior.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you know, there's people aren't watching the news really. The Bigfoot's not in the news. It's not been famous yet.
No.
So it is a, you know, he's just heard of it from the Indians in that area. And it's interesting how, you know, I always tell people our forefathers, man, they were such great outdoorsmen, hunters, you know, their livelihood depended on it, feeding their families depended upon it, and they were good at it. And that's what they did.
Right.
You don't hear any of them talking about paranormal aspects or anything like that. You hear nothing about that. You hear nothing about that until you get into today's society where people are not outdoorsmen, not good at it, not out there all the time. I just don't see that. I think that they would have mentioned it if they thought that there was something going on at that time that they found peculiar, but everything that they talk about is strictly in
the flesh and blood world.
Yeah. I mean, their brains were not smaller than ours.
No,
we are
they
not
were
more
much
intelligent
more
beating.
I think they were much more intelligent because I've seen you know, if you pulled out in 1957, I guarantee if you pulled out the owner manual of a 1957 Chevrolet, it would tell you how to adjust the valves on that car.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We have to put warnings in our owner's manuals not to use cruise control and walk away.
Right.
So don't drink the battery acid in the battery. I mean, that's literally what we're dealing with today. So
I think that if I remember right, the last time I'd seen our IQs had actually dropped around 12 points in the last 20 years.
I believe it.
But, you know, it's not a topic that you can talk about for whatever reason. It's never one of those that's, you know,
taboo
right now. But I mean, I think it was compelling, you know, it was interesting that he did. There was another report that was kind of similar to that one. And it was escaping me what it was, but a hunter was out and camping and he noticed that something was messing with his fire and he had hid in the woods and waited to see what was coming in. And a Bigfoot had came in and was messing with the sticks that were on fire and dancing around. And I'll find that sometime and we can talk about that one too. But,
sure.
But that's probably, that Roe account is probably one of, you know, maybe the big 10 that people talk about in terms of historical accounts.
It's very good. So did this happen and he just decided to go do an affidavit and say, I'm getting this into history, or, you know, what made him do that? Why would someone do that?
You know, they used to do that in those times. largely after World War II, people would go and swear things, and I guess that
Okay.
if something came up and they weren't telling the truth, then they could get in trouble and then they could go to jail. And people really took that seriously back then. Now no
Sure.
one cares. Everybody lies.
Everybody. I mean, look at our politicians, for God's sakes. I mean,
Yeah.
they get paid to lie.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. And so many people in our
is.
society think so little of not telling the truth, being dishonest or whatever it happens to
Oh,
be.
yeah.
And I think that that's why when you look at those old accounts, and I mean, there's a lot of them you can go on YouTube and put in Bigfoot witness interviews from the 60s or whatever, or 70s, and they have those old cameras and stuff. And those people were very matter of fact, and they just tell you the story.
Sure. No, I agree with you 1000%. Okay. So that was your story.
Yeah.
Your first one.
Yes.
I have one also.
Okay.
And this is, one of the big 10. I would say probably one of the big 5. The Albert Osman story.
Okay.
John Green submitted the report. It's a Class A it's report number 1091 on the BFRO.net. OSTMAN. So in 1924, I'm sure most people that have done anything with Bigfoot are very familiar with this. Back in 1924, Albert Osman was I do believe was a prospector or whatever it was. He was going to the Toba Inlet in Lund, British Columbia. He hired an old Indian to take him to the head of the Toba Inlet. He said this Indian was very talkative, talking, and the thing that kind of he mentioned even Sasquatch to him. So he gets there and he gets to Lund, British Columbia. He buys some beans and 4 pounds of prunes and 6 packs of macaroni, 3 pounds of pancake flour, cheese, 6 packets of Rye King hardtack, 3 rolls of snuff, 1 quart sealer of butter, and 2 1-pound cans of milk. And he had 2 boxes of shells for his rifle. So he goes out in the woods, and he's out in the woods for a little while, and he's doing his thing, and all of a sudden he said he's a very hard sleeper, and the next thing you know, he wakes up because he thinks he's in a snowslide. So he finally realized that he's being carried. So this man is being carried by something. He has no idea what it is. I need some coffee, Russ.
Apparently, goodness gracious.
I need some iced tea or something. So I don't drink coffee. So he's being carried. It's very uncomfortable. He's got a foot underneath of him. For some reason, there are some red flags to me. So he's carried for, I think, about 3 hours or 6 hours. I can't remember exactly what it was. And he gets kind of carried into this valley, and he gets out, and here's a family of Bigfoot. Wow. So there you go. So there's 4 Bigfoot. There's an older Bigfoot that had carried him in. There's an old, meek and feeble female Bigfoot that's about, 7 foot tall. And there's 2 youngsters. There's a male youngster and a female youngster. So Albert, it took Albert about 50 years. I think in the 70s is when he actually did an affidavit telling the story. So he didn't tell anybody this story until about 50 years later. So, I'll read some excerpts down through this. This is he was awakened by something picking me up. I was half asleep, but at first I did not remember where I was. I began to get my wits together. I remembered I was on this prospecting trip in my sleeping bag. My first thought was it must be a snowslide, but there was no snow around my camp. Then it felt like I was tossed on horseback, but I could feel whoever it was walking. So this thing picked him up and was carrying him. So it went on for a while. So he gets there, and basically all he's got is a couple cans of snuff, some coffee. He does have his rifle and 6 shells. It's a 30-30, I do believe. I think he's got a can of milk, some cans of peas and things like that. So he takes everything out, puts them against the wall. Let me see. It's a very long story. So he did have his compass. He knew where he was coming from. So he said the first day, not much happened. I had to eat my food cold. The young fellow was coming near me and seemed curious about me. My 1 snuff box was empty, so I rolled it towards him. When he saw it coming, he sprang up quick as a cat and grabbed it. He went over to his sister and showed her. They found out how to open and close it. They spent a long time playing with it. Then he trotted over to the old man and showed him. They had a long chatter. So that was the first day. So he said, I'm going to leave this place. But the big male wouldn't let him. He thought, well, I could shoot this thing. I only got 6 shells, but it's not going to do anything because it's too big. So it goes on. And, let me see, where's something. So he's going to start running out of food. So he starts hatching a plan. And the plan is to get this Bigfoot to eat the snuff or the coffee and see if it'll make him sick and possibly get him away. So he got his coffee. I got my coffee pot boiling, and it was strong coffee too. And the aroma from boiling coffee was what brought them over. I was sitting eating hardtack with plenty of butter on it and sipping coffee. And it sure tasted good. I was smacking my lips, pretending it was better than it really was. I set the can down that was about half full. I intended to warm it up later. I pulled out a full box of snuff, took a big chew. Before I had time to close the box, the old man reached for it. I was afraid he would waste it and only had 2 more boxes. So I held onto the box, intending him to take a pinch like I had just done. Instead, he grabbed the box and emptied it in his mouth, swallowing it in one gulp. Then he licked the box inside with his tongue. After a few minutes, his eyes began to roll over in his head. He was looking straight up. I could see he was sick. Then he grabbed my coffee can that was quite cold by this time. He emptied that in his mouth, grounds and all. That did no good. He stuck his head between his legs and rolled forward a few times away from me. Then he began to squeal like a stuck pig. I grabbed my rifle. I said to myself, this is it. He comes for me. I will shoot him plumb between his eyes. But he started for the spring. He wanted water. I packed my sleeping bag in the pack sack with the few cans I had left. The young fellow ran over to his mother. Then she began to squeal. I started for the opening in the wall, and I just made it. The old lady was right behind me. I fired one shot at the rock over her head. I guess she'd never seen a rifle fire before. She turned and ran inside the wall. I injected another shell in the barrel of my rifle and started downhill, looking back over my shoulder every so often to see if they were coming. I was in a canyon and good traveling. I made fast time, must have made 3 miles in some world record time. I came to a turn in the canyon and I made the sun on my left. That meant I was going south and the canyon turned west. I decided to climb the ridge ahead of me. I knew I must have 2 mountain ridges between me and the salt water. And by climbing this ridge, I would have a good view of the canyon so I could see if the Sasquatch were coming after me. I had a light pack and was making good time up the hill. I stopped after to look back to where I had come from, and nobody followed me. As I came over the ridge, I could see Mount Baker. Then I knew I was going in the right direction. So it continues to go on a little while, talking about this. But what do you think?
What year was that? I forget.
1924.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100 years ago.
It's 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean,
so he too did an affidavit.
mm-hmm.
He swore that this is true and whatever, in front of a jury, signed it, or in front of a judge, signed it, notary, blah, blah, blah. But he did it. It took him quite a long time to do. I think about 50 years. Some things that jump out at me. He had a boiling pot of coffee and the Bigfoot took snuff and he drank the coffee and it was cold. How to go from hot to cold in literally a couple minutes is from what I can see, unless there was a much longer time. Number 2, the man had his rifle, his boots, his knapsack, food, hardtack, coffee pot in his sleeping bag. Do people do that?
People
do that?
If I remember right, the reason why he did that is because he when he was out hunting during the day, he had came back and found that something had been messing around with his food items. And I
Okay.
think he was afraid of losing it, so he put everything in a sleeping bag to keep something from taking it. And then that night he got
Okay.
picked up and carried.
Okay. Sure.
I mean, part of it you think, I mean, why in the freak would someone make up some story like this, especially
That's
100 years ago when they thought that, they could go to jail if they got busted for not telling the truth. And they probably would
right.
have back then.
Right. Which to me, that was a pretty wild. I mean, that's not just, hey, I saw something that was a Bigfoot. This is, I got taken, dad wanted to have dad's got a homely girl. So he goes out and tries to find a mate for the girl who's also homely looking, and it's Albert, and drags Albert back to be with the girl. And, that's pretty, that's a pretty crazy story.
Yeah. I mean, I have to tell you of the classic stories of, and certainly people are going to say this is one of the classics, that this is the one that I probably found the least likely, to be correct or believable. I'm always suspicious whenever I'm interviewing a witness or I hear a story. And of course, there's different stories and different this and that, but I mean, anytime that something is out of the norm of the behavior, I'm not saying that's incorrect, but I'm just saying that it's something we need to pay attention to. And
I kind of agree with you on this one. There are some things, like I said, a Bigfoot rolling, I think is Squatch behavior, or it's primate behavior at some point. You see chimpanzees do it all the time. But for it to pick somebody up and take them, that's a little weird to me.
yeah, I know he was interviewed, I can't remember, by 2 or 3 times by John Green, and he found him to be believable, and that's all we have to go by then. But, I can't think of a reason why somebody would make it up, but the reality is there's a lot of weird people out there, and who knows, I don't know why this guy 50 years later is making up some Bigfoot tale when, he's not getting anything out of it. He's not getting any money. It's not going to be on TV.
Right.
But saying that, I mean, people do some weird stuff.
Right. Exactly. So, like I said, that's one of the top 10 stories, top 5 stories, whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
whenever anybody starts Bigfooting, and they start doing their research, and, they always run across that story, and everybody always reads that story. So, that's my first one. Believe it, don't believe it. Like I said, there's some red flags to me, but, there are some explanations for the things that did happen. So, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know.
So the second one I'm doing is, as I knock the microphone everywhere, is the Ruby Creek incident. Okay, and this is another one that the Bigfooters are probably familiar with, but the general public that listens, because I know you and I have a lot of people that are not traditional Bigfooters that listen, but
right.
It goes something like,
when was this?
1941.
Okay, 1941. I wonder what year in 1941. December, possibly?
September 1941.
Okay, right before we already got blindsided.
Yeah.
Sucked into the war.
Yeah. Which was what, December 5th?
December 7th, 1941. Okay. Yeah.
So this one reads like this. Once again, it's Ruby Creek. It says, stories about the Sasquatch have been appearing in print from time to time since the 1860s, and I have clipping in my files almost every year since the 1920s. But the modern history of the Sasquatch really dates from September 1941, when one of these creatures paid a visit in broad daylight to an Indian family named Chapman. While the Mary Indian stories have usually been dismissed as legend or laughed off because Indians are not supposed to be reliable, this experience was accompanied by too much physical presence to be ignored. The Chapman family consisted of George and Jeannie Chapman and children numbering, at my visit, 4. Mr. Chapman worked on the railroad and was living at the time in a small place called Ruby Creek, 30 miles up the Fraser River from Agassiz, British Columbia, in Canada's Great Western Province. It was about 3 in the afternoon of a sunny, cloudless day when Jeannie Chapman's eldest son, then aged 9, came running to the house saying there was a cow coming down out of the woods at the foot of the nearby mountain. The other kids, a boy aged 7 and a little girl of 5, were still playing in the field behind the house bordering the railroad track. Mrs. Chapman went out to look, since the boy seemed oddly disturbed, and they saw what at first she thought was a very big bear moving among the brushes bordering the field beyond the railroad tracks. She called the 2 children, who came running immediately. Then the creature moved onto the tracks, and she saw to her horror that it was a gigantic man covered with hair, not fur. The hair seemed to be about 4 inches long all over, and of pale yellow-brown color. To pin down this color, Mrs. Chapman pointed out to me a sheet of lightly varnished plywood in the room where we were sitting. This was the color of a brown ochre. This creature advanced directly toward the house, and Mrs. Chapman had, as she put it, much too much time to look at it, because she stood her ground outside while the eldest boy, on her instructions, got a blanket from the house and rounded up the other children. The kids were in a near panic, she told us, and it took 2 or 3 minutes to get the blanket, during which time the creature had reached the near corner of the field only about 100 feet away from her. Mrs. Chapman then spread the blanket and, holding it aloft so that the kids could not see the creature or it them, she backed off at the double to the old field and down on the river beach out of sight, and then ran with the kids downstream to the village. I asked her a leading question about the blanket. Had her purpose in it been using to prevent her kids from seeing the creature, in accord with an alleged Amerindian belief that to do so brings bad luck and often death? And her reply was prompt and surprising. She said that although she had heard white men tell of that belief, she had not heard it from her parents or any of the other people whose advice regarding the so-called Sasquatch had been simply not to go further than up certain points in certain valleys, to run if she saw one, and not to struggle if it caught her, as it might squeeze her to death by mistake. No, she said, I used the blanket because I thought that if it was after one of the kids, and so it might go into the house to look for them instead of following me. This seemed to have been sound logic, as the creature did go into the house and also rummaged around an old outhouse pretty thoroughly, hauling a 55-gallon drum full of saltfish, breaking it open and scattering its content outside. The irony of this, and all those 3 children did die within 3 years, the 2 boys by drowning and the little girl in a sickbed. And just after that, I interviewed the Chapmans. They were also drowned in the Fraser River when a rowboat capsized. Wow. Mrs. Chapman told me that the creature was about 7.5 feet tall. She could estimate its height by the various fence and line posts standing around the field. It had a rather small head and a very short, thick neck. In fact, really no neck at all, a point that was emphasized by William Roe and by the others who claimed to have seen one of these creatures. Its body was entirely human in shape, except that it was immensely thick through the chest and its arms, which were exceptionally long. She did not see its feet, which were in the grass, its shoulders, which were very wide, and it had no breast, from which Mrs. Chapman assumed it was a male, though she did not see any male genitalia due to its long hair covering its groin. She was most definite at one point the naked part of its face and its hands were much darker than its hair and appeared to be almost black. George Chapman returned home from work on the railroad that day shortly before 6 in the evening, and by a route that bypassed the village, so that he saw no one to tell him what had happened. And when he reached his house, he immediately saw the woodshed door battered in, spotted enormous humanoid footprints all over the place. Greatly alarmed, for he, like all the people, had heard of this since his childhood about the big wild men of the mountains, though he did not hear the word Sasquatch until after this incident. He called for his family and then dashed through the house. Then he spotted the foot tracks of his wife and kids going toward the river, and he followed these until he picked them up in the sand beside the river and saw them going downstream without any of the giant ones following. Somewhat relieved, he was retracing his steps when he stumbled across the giant's foot tracks on the riverbank farther upstream. These had come down out of a potato patch which lay between the house and the river, had milled about the river, and then gone back through the old field toward the foot of the mountains, where they disappeared into heavy growth. Returning to the house, relieved to know that the tracks of all 4 of his family had gone off downstream to the village, George Chapman went to examine the woodshed In our interview, after 18 years, he still expressed voluble astonishment that any living thing, even a 7'6" man with a barrel chest, could lift a 55-gallon tub of fish and break it open without using a tool. He confirmed the creature's height after finding a number of long brown hairs stuck in the slabwood intel of the doorway above the level of his head. George Chapman then went off to the village to look for his family and found them in a state of calm collapse. He gathered them up, invited his father-in-law and 2 others to return with him for the protection of his family when he was away at work. The foot tracks returned every night for a week, and on 2 occasions, the dogs that the Chapmans had taken with them set up the most awful racket at exactly 2 a.m. The Sasquatch did not, however, molest them or apparently touch either their house or the woodshed, but the whole business was too unnerving, and the family finally moved out and never went back. After a long chat about this with other matters, Mrs. Chapman suddenly told us something very significant as we were leaving. She said, "It made an awful funny noise." And I asked her if she could imitate the noise for me, but it was her husband who did so, saying that he had heard it at night twice during the week after the first incident. He then proceeded to utter exactly the same strange gurgling whistle that the men in California who had said they heard a Bigfoot call had given us. This is a sound I cannot reproduce in print, but I can assure you this is unlike anything I had ever heard given by a man or beast anywhere in the world. To me, this information is the greatest significance that an American Indian couple in British Columbia should shout out the exact same strange sound in connection with a Sasquatch that 2 highly educated white men did over 600 miles south in connection with a California Bigfoot sighting. Seems incredible if this was all a hoax or publicity stunt or mass hallucination, as some people have claimed. How does that happen? That is a noise which defies descriptions, always sounds the same no matter who tried to reproduce it for me. These were probably the last words on the Sasquatch that the Chapmans uttered, and I absolutely refuse to listen to anybody else who say that they were lying. Admittedly, honest men are such a rarity as possibility to non-exist, but I have met a few who could qualify to put the Chapmans on that list. I didn't remember that they died.
They died fairly quickly afterwards, but it was a rough time. Drowning, drowning must have been a common occurrence back then, because it seems like a lot of people drowned.
Yeah.
You got to think, if there's not a lot of roads and not a lot of bridges, they cross a creek or a kind of a swift moving river, and the next thing you know, they slip, fall, they're gone. There you go, and they drowned.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think?
Somewhere I had read that barrel weighed around 800 pounds.
Okay.
And it was carried and then broken open. So I'm assuming if something was strong enough to lift 800 pounds, probably dropping it, would probably break it open. But
I see it's American Indian, or, they're Indians. That's lends credence to the story. I'm sure, it's not like they have neighbors next door. They're out remote. These things happen. Breaking the barrel. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to the story, I believe.
Had you heard that story before?
Yeah, I have. I'd read that story a long time ago. That's once again, when you start Googling Bigfoot stories, that's one that comes up, and you do read it. So it's a good one.
Yeah, I remember that some of the town people came out. It wasn't in this particular report that I was reading here, and how the town people came out and measured the tracks, and and they were so impressed with how large the tracks were and how big this animal was. But I mean, it just goes to show you that even in British Columbia, which historically has a lot of Bigfoot sightings, I mean, these were very rare everywhere.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that you had people maybe living more remotely than at present. It was just rare for anyone to see one of these things.
Absolutely. So, yeah, no, I think it's a good story. So we're going to run out of time here, so I'm not going to get to spend a whole lot of time on my story, which, people can go listen to this story. That's where I couldn't actually find it in print. It had been printed, it so it's what it was. It's called The Creature. I can't even find honestly, I can't even find when this was. Maybe I have no idea when it was.
Okay.
Probably was the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, possibly. Basically a guy owned a cabin. He did something. Him and his wife got in an argument. She kind of kicked him out of the house. He goes up to this cabin and he's living. Well, he's, digging some ponds or whatever, digging some things around the house all the time. So he says,
stay awake here.
Yeah, we got like 10 minutes. I'll be good. So, because I start talking, I need more oxygen. I'm not getting enough oxygen in my body. So it's not that I'm tired. I just need oxygen. I don't breathe when I talk. So he sees this thing, this creature comes around the corner of the cabin. He ends up feeding it some apples. It ends up taking some apples. It comes back day after day. And he ends up calling it Kong. It's a male Bigfoot. He doesn't really tell anybody about it because he doesn't want anybody finding out about it. He actually gets to the point where he can literally go up to it. He gets it to sit down. He can push on it to get it to sit down. He tried to pick its feet up and look at his feet, but it didn't really want him to do that. So it kind of didn't let him. This goes on for a while. He even tried to get it to come in the car at one point. So here's what it was. Here's how it goes. My first impression was that the creature was ape-like or man-like, about 7 feet tall and covered with a short brown hair. Its eyes were large and its mouth expressive. It did not have a large protruding jaw or excessively thick lips, as artist conceptions of ape men usually have. The body was powerful, with well-developed leg and shoulder muscles, and sported a protruding stomach. A somewhat long, limp penis hung between his legs. Let me keep going. The protruding stomach may seem normal when one considers apes and sees pictures of them, but when an artist conceives a human, the human is pictured as flat-stomached and muscular, which is a misconception. Hold on. I'm loose.
Certainly a misconception nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. Misconceptions. Stand on any street corner and you will observe that humans are flabby with protruding guts. So maybe this wasn't too long ago. Okay, so I found this on YouTube, so I have to skip through the YouTube things as I read this. For about a week thereafter, I set apples on the railing to no avail. Would set 2 at a time and would not leave more than that overnight. Why should the creature want my apples when he would pick up his own from any of wild apple trees found in the area? So this goes on, and basically the creature does come back, and the system finally paid off. On the September day of the annual equinox, I made friendly contact. I had a good sweat. The car was parked below the property and my apple bait set out. Let me see. My first impression was that the creature would not appear, for this was only the second day of my luring. As the sun began to set, I took a pencil and drew a line on the porch railing in an east-west direction for no other reason than I was a scientist, and on this day of the equinox, the sun always is in the east-west, and I always able to observe directions from my porch, blah, 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 So basically this thing keeps coming around. It would get, he would throw at apples, it would eat apples, it would come back. He said he tried to set up camera traps to no avail. He tried to get it to come in the car, it wouldn't. He had a buddy of his that worked in maintenance. This man was a professor at a local college. We don't know where this was at. You can search for The Creature by, I don't even know who wrote it. Who wrote the thing?
I don't know. I didn't even remember it. I remember you telling me it was in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's Jan Clement, The Creature. Search for it on YouTube, and literally you can find it. There's a lady that has a YouTube channel that's got a bunch of this stuff on there, and she literally reads the entire thing over a 2-hour period. So this thing comes around, and And then I think towards the end, it just kind of doesn't. He kind of moves back in with his wife, so he's not out there all the time. And this thing just kind of doesn't come around anymore. He's afraid it was shot or died. But you know, that's an interesting story because it's a college professor that wrote this. He published about 100 copies originally. They took some, threw some in the trash. It kind of came out a little again, and it actually ended up being published 3 times. 3 separate copies were published. You know, a lot of them were sold. A lot of people read the book. Like I said, it's not very big. It's kind of a compelling story to me. I don't know. I mean, once again, it's not acting. It's the out of norm ape behavior. So therefore, it throws a red flag. Hey, I couldn't get a picture. Really? You couldn't get a picture?
Mm-hmm.
How do you not get a picture?
I'm just trying to get in your freaking car.
Right, exactly. You can get a picture.
Yeah.
Pull a camera out and take a picture. I mean, you can't outsmart this thing. I'm sure you could. So it is what it is. It's a good story. If you got 2 hours to listen to someone talk about it or, kill it, run on YouTube.
I'm not inclined to believe it. I mean, I'm sure I've listened to it or one time or another, but I mean, it reminds me when you're telling it, remind me of that book called Enoch, which was out of Florida, with this man that supposedly have these encounters. And Autumn Williams, which is out in the Pacific Northwest somewhere, she's not really around anymore, had interviewed this guy. She never even saw him in person or went to the place at all. It was just strictly her doing interviews. And later, we found out that person had been interviewed in person in that location, vetted by a BFRO person, and found not to be true. But for whatever reason, people were compelled by these stories of, like this gentleman, that supposedly had this happen. This isn't uncommon. We hear it commonly, but I'm just not inclined to believe that story. It's just so out of the ordinary from what we know of behavior.
It is. It's very out of the ordinary. So, it is what it is. Well, I think I think we're about out of time.
Okay. Well, we appreciate everybody listening. Like and subscribe. We've got another one of my witnesses coming up here really shortly, so we're going to be dealing with that, which should be fun. It's a great witness, with an impeccable background. So going to have that on soon. And anything else going on? Untold Radio. You can be my West Virginia Facebook page, West Virginia Bigfoot. If you want to report it, you can reach out to bigfootdoc.com.
We really need to start posting more on our Instagram page.
I'm going to start. I'm working on that. Actually, I'm going to start posting on TikTok. I got somebody helping me on TikTok. We're going to be putting 10-minute sections of our podcast on TikTok.
10 minutes? That's a long piece.
I know, but apparently that's what people are wanting.
Okay. All right. Well, pick the good piece where you talk a lot. I
know. It was funny. I should have been writing something down this week, and I did not write down because going to choose a 10-minute section. It was interesting, and I should have chose 10 minutes of you yawning on there.
Like I said, man, I don't drink coffee, so it's.
I know, me either.
You know how that goes. Anyway,
that's right. We appreciate it, everybody. It's good to see you.
We are out of here. Let me see. Whoop.